आज काफी ठंड है, क्या लोग आए हैं? They said yes, the hall is full. So thanks to all of you to come here on early morning of a Delhi winter which just refuses to go away. It is indeed my pleasure and honor to be here with all of you and welcome our Honorable Minister here who has taken out time to be a part of this conclave. As per the technical definition, DNPA is a collection of digital arm of legacy news media companies of India. We represent more than 80% of digital news traffic in this country. But our soul is much more than that. We are much more than just an association. We are a collection of body and minds which dreams of free-flowing, verified information in the digital ecosystem. We believe in the true spirit of journalism and we want to build an ecosystem where truth and knowledge dominates and misinformation has no place. While the age of internet has given us free-flowing, unlimited sources of information, the true sources of knowledge have really dried up. Imagine your young kids going to the internet, genuinely looking out for some piece of knowledge. But what they get? They get baited by the vultures of misinformation and get trapped into an endless loop of information bias. Can you guess what would be the level of misinformation or so-called unverified news or information on the internet? Any wild guesses from you? What would be the percentage of unverified news or information on the internet? So according to very latest research done, it is more than 50%. So almost half of the internet's information is actually not true and verified. In Q3 of 2020, there were 1.8 million fake news engagements on Facebook. 18 million pieces of COVID-19 misinformation was given on the internet. And to top it up, publishers of misinformation get 6 times more engagement than the actual news. Wow. They get everything. The traffic and the eyeballs, which leads to, you all know. DNPA includes Dainik Jagran, Dainik Bhaskar, the Indian Express, Malayalam Manorama, Inadu Television, India Today, Amar Ujala, Hindustan Times, Zee Media, ABP Network, Lokmat, Times of India, NDTV, Express Network, Mathrubhumi, India TV, The Hindu and Network 18, whose digital arm is helping us to curate this event. Future of digital media in these exciting times of AI transformation looks bright. And we all believe that all of us can actually work towards a brighter future. India is on the cusp of rolling out a very forward-looking Digital India Act, which should help us, the policymakers, to create a more level playing field in the digital ecosystem. We already have amongst us Honorable Minister Shri Rajesh Chandrasekharji, Ministry of State for Electronics and Information Technology. Shri Anurag Thakurji will also join us during the day. As policymakers, we look forward to engage with all of them to chart out the new road. All of us believe that the government, the big tech and the publishers have to work hand in hand to create an ecosystem which is a long-term sustainable flora and fauna for our industry. Imagine a world where the news ecosystem doesn't exist. Imagine a day where you open a Times of India, Indian Express, Amar Ujala, a Hindu, a NDTV, and it says 404, the URL does not exist. I'm sure the world doesn't want to see that day. And I'm sure that all of us together will make a difference to work towards a world which has nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari, for setting the tone right and for sharing those.
Great experience, personal and professional, when it comes to talking about tech, IT, industry, and specifically the digital space as well. So we couldn't have had anybody better than Rajesh and Shekhar to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to begin by asking you, how would you define India's place today in what we call the digital world? And what is it that you specifically, your government specifically is doing to maintain whatever competitive edge we have or to safeguard India's existence?
Look, I think, I mean, all of us are reasonably aware of what transformation India has gone through the last 10 years. And we can speak to transformation in almost every segment of our life. But certainly in the digital and tech space, the transformation has been, I mean, I'm not a man used to being very adjective driven, but certainly in technology you cannot but use the word spectacular. In the last 10 years, what we have seen in this country is that we've gone from being a nation that was predominantly an ITES, a nation with being a back office, as the phrase used to be used, to the world's enterprises and governments, to now an ecosystem and an innovation economy that basically spans the entire digital ecosystem, current and emerging. So whether you look at AI, whether you look at semiconductors, whether you look at electronic systems of the future, whether you look at Web3, whether you look at any of these areas that you look at, as you look to the future, an Indian flag, Indian startups and Indian innovation is there, front and center across the landscape. So that is one. The second is the most important aspect of what has happened in the last 10 years, is that India and Indian talent is now being seen not just as a place to have a cost arbitrage or have a back office base in India, but really from a point of view of being a partner in shaping the future of tech. And I think that transformation is not a trivial one, it is really a significant one, and it is something that we intend to protect, nurture and continue to catalyze. This is our Prime Minister's vision. In terms of, you make the broader point about protecting our interests, I think we are certainly at a stage, at a launching pad, at an inflection point where we are going to only grow further. And there are, of course, there are going to be challenges that we will face from certain neighbors of ours who don't like the rise of India, don't like India's leading role in shaping the future of tech. And there will be many of these things that will play out on the global stage. But I certainly, without the risk of overstating, can tell you today that the rocket that is the Indian tech and innovation ecosystem is certainly now in orbit, and it is an unstoppable force driven by hundreds and thousands of innovative minds that start all over the country. And digital content and digital media certainly is one very important element of that.
I will come specifically to digital content and media, but you've been a technopreneur yourself. Why is it that Indians are doing so well? What do you think? What is it about us that we are doing so well? We're no longer just being looked at as a workforce, but as partners in it.
So, to answer that question, I will just share an experience of mine. Some months ago, not some months ago, but a year, 2 years ago, when I just became minister, I led a delegation of 30 startups to the UK. And I've said this story before, somebody has heard it before, so excuse me, I'm going to repeat it anyway. And when I landed there, the High Commissioner in the UK told me that there were 7 ministers of the UK government that wanted to meet me. So obviously, being a politician, I said, wow, I have suddenly hit the international stage and there are 7 UK ministers who want to meet me and I'm very important and all of that. Then I drove to the hotel and then it was clarified to me that they didn't want to meet me, they wanted to meet the startups. So 3 days after meeting startups and all these ministers came just to experience what these youngsters are doing and why they were doing it. On a Sunday, the last day of our stay there, we had a breakfast with Boris Johnson, who was just the Prime Minister then. And he said, he held my hand and he said, what is Narendra Modi feeding these youngsters in India that you have this confidence and talent? So I said, he's not doing anything by way of feeding them. And this is the answer to your question. Essentially what has happened in the last 10 years is that government has now, and the policies of our Prime Minister is all about enabling the talent and success, that the talent and the initiative and the effort that always was. And I come from an era where I was also an entrepreneur in the pre-Narendra Modi era. And I can tell you, it was a struggle, it was a pain, it was about dealing with government that put roadblocks at every stage of your development. And instead, in the last 10 years, what you have is policy making and government that is a stakeholder in the success of a young entrepreneur or a young person in writing. So I think that is the qualitative structural change, and that is what has clearly created this kind of momentum that you are seeing today. And I'll tell you again, Shivani, what you are seeing today, and again I'm not a person used to overstating or rhetoric, is a tip of the iceberg. The next wave of startups, the next wave of innovation that is around the corner is going to be deeper, much more tectonic than what we have seen in the last 5 years.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you, you're at the forefront of policy, you're at the forefront of trends, and you interact with, not just the tech industry all around the world, but obviously governments all around the world to understand concerns globally. What, according to you, is the biggest challenge we are looking at when it comes to the tech space?
I think the biggest challenge, and I may be contrarian on this, a lot of people say infrastructure and computers and so on and so forth. I really think the biggest challenge, and I don't say this as if this is not an unsurmountable challenge, but it is a goal that we must meet, is that we have to make our talent pool really global standard, and we have to aim for really this kind. In areas like semiconductors and artificial intelligence, it is no longer enough to be just an engineer, or just have a master's, or just have an undergraduate, or just have a PhD. You really need the ability to research and innovate. You need research and innovation embedded in your colleges and universities and in the places that you work. And therefore, in this budget, when the Honorable Prime Minister announced $12 billion, 1 lakh crores as seed money, not even the final money, the seed money for research and innovation, I think that is a sign and a signal to how much importance Prime Minister Narendra Modi places on shaping the potential and catalyzing the potential of our young Indians into really global standard talent. The real challenge for the world today, Shivani, is not GPUs or AI compute infrastructure or data centers or the internet infrastructure. It is about where do you get these smart young minds from that will shape, innovate and create solutions in the coming decade, So, and I think the answer, we must all collectively agree, is that a large part of the talent should come from India and can come from India.
I remember asking you when we were discussing deepfakes concerns recently, and I asked you, is it really possible to control something like artificial intelligence? Can you be ahead of it, or are you always going to be chasing the 8 ball? You seem to be very optimistic that we don't need to fear the kind of technologies we are looking at coming at us.
No, I don't think we should fear technology. I think that is, it is like fearing what is inevitable. You know that AI is the greatest invention in our lifetime. I come from a time, and it may be obvious to you that as an old man, that I did my master's thesis 30 years ago in AI, 25 years ago in AI. And those days we struggled to train a model with 8 parameters and 6 parameters, and we failed. And today we are talking about models that are training 2 billion, 20 billion parameters, and they are aiming to train trillion parameter models. So we are certainly progressed a huge amount in the last few years, and it is inevitable that AI will shape, change, transform the way we live, what we know as the normal, and that is just obvious. But what we can do as government is not to fight that or impede that or roadblock that, but to harness it fully and create the guardrails and accountability on the platforms that offer AI trained solutions to our consumers, to be accountable for the safety and trust of those platforms. So our approach is very, very simple, clear and consistent. Whether you're a big tech from the US or wherever, whether you're a company in India, whether you're a small company, big company, what you give to our consumers has to be safe and trusted. The digital Nagrik's rights to consume safe and trusted content is something we believe is the duty of the government to ensure, and for that we are and we will continue to legislate in a manner where platforms that deliver AI are accountable for the safety and trust of that AI. So whether you're a social media platform or you're a shopping e-commerce platform or a chat GPT like generative AI platform, we will insist on the safety and trust of the platform before the platform is made publicly accessible by the consumer. And it will be accountability under law. So there is none of this, what we've seen for decades of self-regulation, guidelines, try it if you can, a small nudge and a small step. These will be legally accountable guardrails where platforms cannot trespass and cannot allow their users to trespass into criminality or harm using those AI platforms.
I have a particular set of concerns of the digital media publishing industry, and we'll come to that.
Sure.
But the way you talked about AI and you talked about your own thesis 35 years ago, personally for you, Minister, this must be a really exciting time.
No, I say this, I have had the privilege and good fortune of going to many colleges, campuses, over 80 college campuses over the last 2.5 years. And I will say this with the utmost responsibility. This is the most exciting time to be in tech, whether you are in deep tech or you are in media tech or you are in digital media or whatever. This is certainly the most exciting period to be a stakeholder and involved in tech. And of course, even for a grizzled veteran like me, it is certainly the most exciting time for me as well. And it's an absolute privilege to be a sort of participant in the unfolding of this great story that is the Indian tech story.
Absolutely. Let me come to some concerns that digital publishers have today. First of them is a lingering concern that has been raised over the IT rules regarding censorship. And the concern that some of the rules are so arbitrary that they will make content providers needlessly guilty of what is the concern over, legitimate concern over fake news and false information.
At the risk of sounding a little rude, Shivani, I think anybody who characterizes the IT rules as being arbitrary or far-reaching or censorship, I will submit to you for your kind consideration hasn't read the rules. And if you have read the rules, you will find that the rules are absolutely clear, very simple, very consistent guardrails to protect the consumer and the consumer from harm. What we've laid down in the rules are 11 types of unlawful content that should not be on any platform. Unlawful not just under the IT Act, unlawful under the criminal code. For example, CSAT. Now, nobody can argue that prohibiting child sexual abuse material on any platform on the internet is an overreach. Nobody can argue, for example, that any content that violates somebody else's ownership patent is overreach. It is a violation under some law. Nobody can argue that misinformation and deep fakes using patently false information is an overreach, because under the criminal code, under 469, under 177, under forgery, these are all prosecutable crimes.
But particularly information on government.
So there is nothing. We are saying today that there are categories of content that are unlawful under the law. Those, just because you are on the internet, that suddenly doesn't become lawful. And the internet certainly cannot become a space where there is the law does not reach. So what we are saying is today, every one of those 11 pieces of unlawful prohibited content is unlawful under the criminal law. So these are all prohibited under law in any case in the real world, and there cannot be an argument that it has to be permitted in the cyber world.
The concern is particularly over what is deemed false and fake, pertaining to any business of the government and government mandated body deciding what is right or what is wrong.
Again, it's a misreading and misunderstanding of it. number one, there is nothing subjective about patently false. If you say 1 plus 1 equals 3, that is patently false. If
Not
you
in
say-
today's world.
Then you and I have a disagreement on that. I'm not a woke, and I certainly don't get into saying ambiguity on issues like 1 plus 1 may not be 3. I'm not in that world. I have to protect the Indian citizens from anybody who goes and says 1 plus 1 is not 2, it could be 3. So that is certainly our duty to protect people who go and preach that. So if you believe 1 plus 1 is 3, then that is a problem that you have. It is certainly not a problem that I can solve for anybody. But having said that, what I'm saying today is even the fact check unit, which was agitated by a comedian who went to the Mumbai High Court, and there is a story, that statement itself is a story. The court in a split decision has found that this needs to be referred to a third judge. What the fact check unit was doing was, simply because intermediaries wanted help from the government in determining what is wrong and right about the government, and because no third party can determine whether a government decision is really right or wrong, because only the government has the information for it. So the fact check unit was a response to a demand by intermediaries or a request from intermediaries saying we are unable to determine what is right and wrong and what is unlawful in the absence of information from the government. We said, okay, the government will volunteer a fact check unit telling you what is right and wrong. Number one. Number two, we never said that a platform needs to take down the content. We said what is in dispute should be labeled as saying disputed. Now, if people have a problem with that, that's fine. How that becomes censorship? In my book, censorship is when a government mandates, without establishing any basis in law, saying take down this, I don't like this, take down this, I don't like this. This is not what we are doing. We are saying very clearly 12 types of content are unlawful. If you are a social media platform, you certainly should not have your user posting that content. And if you continue to want to have your user anonymous, then you will lend yourself to being prosecuted and your safe harbor drops. That's it.
At the same time, recently India has been rated top at risk of fake news and misinformation. How do you look at that?
No, I look at that with great concern, and I look at that in a sense of validation of what we have been saying since October of 2022. We put out the rules, we talked about fake news way before the world woke up to it. We talked about deep fakes in October 22, way before it became fashionable to talk about. Because we sense this. We are today a country with 90 crore Indians using the internet. We are surrounded by people who are deeply desiring of slowing down India's rise. They see today no longer an option to fight us at the border. They see no longer an option to use terrorism as a tool. They see clearly an option to use the internet, use misinformation to cause law and order and chaos and disturbances in India as a very, very soft, vulnerable underbelly of the Indian democracy. And that is why every step we are taking today is on one hand to ensure that no citizen's fundamental rights are ever transgressed or violated. We are the trustees of that. The government considers that we are trustees of protecting citizens' fundamental rights. At the same time, understanding that this is a real challenge and a real problem, and that we have to have legislative guardrails that ensure platforms are accountable for the correctness or for the trust of the content that they put out there for consumers. Therefore, there is a responsibility that is passed on platform to be doubly and triply sure that what consumers consume is really the truth and safe and trusted, as Tanmay mentioned today. And that is, in my opinion, a shared goal for anybody who wants the Indian internet to be a robust, healthy, profitable, monetizable internet rather than an internet that is toxic, with content that is 50% unsure, unverified, nobody knows what the truth is, nobody knows which platform delivers the truth of which platform. That is certainly not a goal that any one of us wants on the internet.
Over to the concern that I think most of the hall is waiting for, which is revenue sharing. Content providers, content creators are worried about the hegemony or monopolistic tendencies of big tech as far as revenue share is concerned. We've seen certain continents, certain countries move towards this direction. Could India be the next?
No, so India has already spoken, our government has already spoken that we are concerned that there is a deep asymmetry between those who create content and those who help the content creators monetize that content. We, from a policy making point of view, we want the internet to be open. What does open mean? We don't want the internet or the commercial, the monetization on the internet to be in the purview of or to be controlled by just one or two or three companies. That's we are very clear about that. We don't like monopolies, we don't like duopolies. We saw the recent action by the NCLT and the Competition Commission against Google. We are certainly not of the opinion that our internet, with 120 crore Indians that are going to be consuming the internet by 2025, should be catered to by these big islands on the internet that are carved out, whether they are e-commerce, whether they are search, whether they are social media or ad tech. So that is a basic principle-led approach on the part of this government. Now, are we concerned about ad tech monopolies and duopolies? Certainly. Do we have an answer for that? Certainly. The Digital India Act in its free consultation laid out this as one of the issues that we were going to deal with. That we were certainly going to have to deal with this very, very pronounced and very visible asymmetry between the small guy or even the medium to big guy in the Indian content creation ecosystem and these big platforms that are in a sense the gatekeepers to monetizing the content. And that asymmetry, I believe, needs to be legislated, or at least at the very least, least regulated through rules of the new legislation. And I'm hopeful that after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's resumed office, this will be one of his priorities.
So this is going to be in the third term?
Yes.
Okay. You've teased the third term as well. I do want to invite some questions from the audiences as well. Any more concerns that the digital publishers would like to raise to the Minister? This is your opportunity. And even as we wait for any questions, I have one about how do you feel digital content providers, publishers can safeguard themselves against AI, for example, eating into content creation? Or is this going to be a
it's an important, almost existential question about these platforms, especially generative AI platforms, scraping the internet and using publicly available content to train their models. And there is a case that is now underway in the US, New York Times versus OpenAI, that I think will be the defining case on what are the rights of a digital news platform or indeed anybody, even an individual who puts content that he or she has created out there for public consumption. Does he or she forego all rights just because they put it out for public consumption vis-a-vis a model that uses that content to train and then monetize that trained model? So I think this is a very defining case. I personally, and I'm giving you my personal point of view, I think that is not a terrible model. As I said, the basic principle is that the content creator, whether he or she has put it out there in the public or has kept it behind a paywall or some other way of safeguarding it, must have a right to whatever value comes out of the monetization of that content is my thought as an individual, as a matter of principle. Now, how do we enshrine that, legislate that, how do we make that happen? That is an issue that we will have to discuss.
Any questions from the audience? Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing such invaluable insights and motivation